And yet, here's something that I think we need to think about. Whenever we consider these possibilities, we need to constantly be mindful of the fact that we love to scare the hell out of ourselves.
Warning, this is not entertainment.
Hello everyone and welcome to Eschaton. I have a special treat for you guys today. It's been a long time since we've had this particular guest on, but I know he's a fan favorite. I've had emails periodically from time to time of people saying, hey, when's the next time this guy's going to be on the show? So today is the day. Dave Greenockle, good buddy of mine, who's been away from the podcast for quite some time, is coming on to do a session with me to, one, catch up on life, on current events, what's been going on in his life. And then in a broader picture, we're going to talk about some big life changes that he's made that kind of tie in with a theme that's been recurring in this podcast over the last few months in particular, but really over the last year, I would say we've really started to focus in on nature and getting back to the land and this idea of finding truth and wisdom and revelation in nature and in the natural world, which has been a big emphasis in my life and a big pull on my heart in recent months. So I figure what time better than now to have Dave on the show, because he and his family at the beginning of this year, 2021, actually bought a farm and they're living that homestead life, the one that I'm personally transitioning to in the next few months here, which I've already talked about in the podcast, and the life that I know several of you who have reached out and notified me personally, you're also doing the same. You've made transitions either due to COVID or a loss of a job or just ready for a change. And a lot of that kind of ties in with this theme of being pulled back to the land. So we're going to go all over the place here. I'll tell you now in advance, the first hour of this podcast, we really talk shop and get into the weeds on the specifics of what he's been up to, what types of livestock and the layout of his property looks like. So we're going to talk about that for about an hour. So for those of you who are either on a farm, on a homestead, or aspiring to do that, you know, you're going to love that content because Dave gives a lot of good advice, a lot of wisdom that'll save you a lot of money and a lot of lessons learned the hard way in that first hour. But if that's not you, if you're not somebody who either has a homestead or plans to have one or raise livestock anytime in the near future, then you might want to skip that first hour and you can jump right in. I would say the second half of the show, if you want to jump past that first hour, that's where everybody really, really needs to turn an ear up and listen. I really felt like Dave was on the ball in this podcast, and I found myself agreeing with a lot of points that he made, as well as adding some color commentary on my own. But I think you'll see what I mean once you listen in here. We start talking about the 30,000-foot view, the big philosophical push that we're seeing in our own lives, but also in a grander scale that's pushing people back toward the land, back toward a simpler, more primitive, you might say, but an older way of life. What is that? What's the draw? What's the calling? Why is it making a resurgence in a modern age where almost all of these modern conveniences can be had in a moment, at the snap of a finger? Yet so many people are choosing to opt out of the rat race, opt out of this on-command society, this push-of-a-button society, and add some strenuousness, add some hard work, some sweat, some labor to their life, and getting back to the earth, getting closer to the earth, and slowing down a little bit. If you want to know what that's all about, if you want to know why this revival or revolution, so to speak, is happening, albeit quietly on some fronts, listen into the second half of this episode, and I think you'll really be encouraged and perhaps motivated in a way that you haven't been before. So I hope you guys enjoy. This is a long one, so I'm not going to be too long-winded here on the front end, but I do want to say thank you to all of our listeners, all of our supporters. Appreciate you guys. Can't make this show without you. Hope you guys enjoy. Take care. Dave, welcome back to Eschaton.
Yeah, it's good to be back on. It's been a little bit, but a lot has transpired. So it's good to hear you and in this format see you. Yeah, man. I'm excited to be back on and to talk shop.
Yeah, it's been, I think, almost 2 years since we've done a show together. And to this day, the most listened to or downloaded episodes, not to puff you up too much, are the ones where you're on it. And I occasionally still get emails of people saying, hey, what happened to Greenockle? Is he going to be on the podcast
Oh,
again?
that's
So
awesome. That's awesome.
yeah, so I'm glad we're finally able to do it again. And I know people will be looking forward to listening. But in the time that things have, uh, the things that have transpired over the last couple of years have obviously, been headline news for all of us and really changed a lot of our lifestyles. I think last time you and I talked in the podcast, we were talking about this idea of man camp and kind of getting out to nature and reinstilling some values that may, been
Right.
overlooked in modern culture. And then this thing called COVID comes along and, kind of changes all of our lives. And most of us get even more inward focused or locked indoors than we've ever been. So it's kind of funny how fate works in that way. But in that time period, especially over the last year, I know your family has made some big lifestyle changes and some big moves, and that's going to kind of segue into the meat of what we wanted to talk about in today's episode. And I think a lot of people will, recognize the theme. Lately, I've been talking a lot about this idea of getting back to nature, this idea of, that lost connection or maybe that severed cord a little bit between the current zeitgeist in our culture and a more natural or agrarian lifestyle. So to start, what's just been going on in your world, man? What's transpired over the last year or two?
Yeah, well, one huge thing is we had our third daughter. I think last time I was on, I think Michelle, I guess, would have been pretty far along pregnant. So we had our third daughter, Hannah. So now I have three daughters, Naomi, Eden, and Hannah. So that's probably the most important thing. But in the midst of obviously all these changes in the world and in our society, how should I say this? I'm sure my wife will be listening to this at some point. I kind of slowly convinced my wife to be willing to get onto the next adventure of life. And after a decent amount of research and looking around, we found a relatively small homestead kind of property. And so we have been doing a little bit of homesteading-ish kind of thing. We're learning. We haven't given up our jobs yet, but just been learning on what works, what doesn't work, what is it going to take to really try to become as self-sufficient as possible. So that's been the journey, and it's been wild. I mean, even a quick lesson, even before coming on this podcast, I was like, oh my gosh. I was hanging out with my kids, and I was like, wait a minute, no one put the animals to bed, and it was dark, and there's fox, and there's raccoons, and I had to rush out there and round up the ducks and the chickens, the other animals, sheep and goats. They're fine with those animals, but yeah, it's been crazy. Everything from teaching my two oldest daughters like what it takes to slaughter an animal, and to process it and to respect its life and to know where your food is coming from. It's been a wild journey already, and we only started in February, so it's been crazy.
Well, congratulations on the birth of your daughter, first and foremost. That's awesome, man. I've seen the pictures online. It's beautiful. And then, you say small homestead. I see some of the pictures and it's a beautiful piece of property. I think a lot of people think this idea of farming or homesteading is out of reach for them because they may live in an urban or a suburban environment with only a backyard space. Could you just kind of elaborate on how many animals you have? And we don't have to go into the exact acreage, but on a few acres, you're raising quite a few, different types of livestock.
We got plans for the future. So the first thing I would say is, I'm sure anyone who's in this vibe, and I apologize, as I was telling you before, you might hear another conversational point, is this livestock guardian dog, puppy that we got, and he's kind of coming into his own. So it's about around this time at night, he just starts giving this alarm, and he just starts barking to let everything know that he's there. So if you hear that in the background, just kind of adds to the atmosphere of the show. Hopefully he'll stop soon. But so yeah, we have 7 acres. I would say about a half, 3/4 of an acre is more like around the house, kind of like traditional, kind of like, oh, this is our little yard, if you will. But there's 7 acres of rolling / mountainous type of pastures, which is very interesting. Rationale behind that is man, growing up or going to school and living a little bit around the Philadelphia area, there's a lot of expensive properties around here, and to go somewhere, and we looked at some properties, 20 acre, even 50 acre lots, was a bit too far or a bit too rural, I should say, particularly for my wife. And so we just found this spot, it was very serendipitous. It's kind of perfect for both of us, like right on the edge. I mean, we're 10 minutes from like a lot of happening stuff, a lot of cool stuff, a lot of restaurants, kind of a hip town. Those of you listening, it's the Valley Forge, Phoenixville area in southeastern Pennsylvania. At the same stage, we're stone's throw from more rural kind of stuff, and then in between is kind of like this, like, somewhat yuppity kind of horse culture. It's kind of blended in the mix of it. So, we got a pretty good deal on it. It was an unfortunate divorce situation, and it's an old house, man, 1800. So not everyone wants to bite that off, but we're excited that we did. So yeah, we have what do we have? We have, of course, our now 3 dogs. One is not really a pet. He's really a part of the animal kingdom out there in the hierarchy of the farm. We've got about, I guess, 11 minus 1. We're now down to 10 chickens because we butchered 1. We're 16 minus 1, so 15 chickens. Actually, minus 2, right? Because 1 chicken got sick and died, and the other one was a rooster, and I'm not sure if I have to give a trigger warning, but he was acting inappropriately to the females, and didn't want fertile eggs. So I took a 9mm because I didn't have a 22, unfortunately, and we ended his habit.
Oh, you shot the rooster.
I did. I was gonna, I was like, maybe I should slit its throat. Yeah. Sorry for those that are listening. Maybe we should eat it. Everything I read was like roosters are really tough.
Yeah.
Meat, I probably could have, would have, should have, but I was just kind of like, all right, this is what we got to do. So yeah, wasn't real happy about that because I would have liked to really engage more in the cycle of life kind of thing. But it was like just one of those things where we just have to take care of this. This is getting annoying. So yeah, it's an interesting thing about backyard chickens. I mean, if you get a aggressive rooster, I mean, he literally can and will kill some of the hens in trying to reproduce. So
yeah, we went through a similar thing last year. For those who don't know, but I've mentioned a couple times, we raised chickens in my current house, not a homestead, just chickens basically. But we had to get rid of a rooster last year, and we used the kill cone, slit its throat and whatnot, and it didn't taste good. I thought we would just, cook it up and it would be a chicken dinner, but yeah, roosters kind of tough. So we learned that lesson the hard way. Between, roosters and hens, egg layers are a little different than the meat varieties, but we did hatch eggs for the first time this year and had a couple of our own. We gave most away, kept 2, and one of them died, unfortunately, but it's kind of neat to see the cycle of life. It's the first thing in my life, even growing up on a farm, that I physically hatched myself for birds.
That's awesome.
So yeah, so chickens are cool. You've also got sheep, I believe I've seen pictures of, right?
Yeah, we have 4 sheep. They are a breed called Jacob sheep. Very fascinating sheep. The supposed rumor is they're coming from the lineage of the biblical story of Jacob. If you remember in Genesis, Jacob and his father-in-law Laban. Jacob does this kind of early kind of breeding program to produce specifically spotted and striped sheep. So very, very fascinating breed of sheep. They are originating, they can tell, genetically from Syria. So, I mean, that is the Levant. So it's possible. But I really like that sheep as of now because they are supposedly, and I only had them for a couple months, but they're supposed to be a hardier, more primitive breed. I think that's one of the key things I'm learning with homesteading is don't get the livestock breeds. In my opinion, I'm sure there's people that have been doing this a lot longer than I who may say something differently, that are these kind of breeds that man has been tampering with for literally thousands of years. when they're breeding for that, they're breeding for very specific traits, which can be very positive, but negative traits leak in there. So the the Jacob sheep, there are these very interesting sheep, this ornamental horns, almost like have you ever seen like in like kind of Judaica kind of stuff, like the shofar is like a smaller shofar, not the real long ones, but they have this ornamental horns. They're smaller, but they're a lot hardier. So they browse a little bit more like a goat a bit. They don't need as much care in terms of your, making sure they get in the right grasses and things like that. I mean, obviously you want to feed them properly, but they're hardy. They're not these kind of boutique-y kind of sheep that man has manipulated. And then the thing that I'm really fascinated with is they don't get hoof rot as easy. They're sturdier against parasites. And then the third one, which we'll be figuring out in the spring, is that they're supposed to be like almost hands off when it comes to birthing. They're one, really good mothers. Two, that they almost, I mean, obviously there's always a situation, right? But by and large, they will give birth without assistance from humans. So all of that, I was like, all right, this seems like a good breed, and I worked out a good deal. So we got 4 of those, one ram, 2 ewes, and then 1 lamb that we're going to use to kind of enlarge the flock. And then we have 4 goats, 1 billy goat, 3 females. And then we just got 2 barn cats. These are things that you got to think about, man. Like, okay, you have feed in your barn, you have grain, you have, animal feces. I don't care how well you're cleaning it up. I mean, you have a barn that you're not in all the time. I mean, it's protecting from the elements. I mean, this is prime time for rodents, right? So we have 2 cats. Both of them we just got recently. One we just began to acclimatize to the barn. They're supposed to spend about 3 weeks in a confined area, so they begin to adopt the barn as their territory. We had one earlier, which we only did that for a week because we're newbies, and we're like, oh, the cat, he wants to get out. We should let her out, blah, blah, blah. Sure enough, we let her out. She was hanging out with us for a little bit. And then she started leaving, coming back, leaving a little longer, coming back. And now she's been gone for months. So these are like little techniques that we've been learning. So yeah, I think that's, and of course, chickens. We have about 15, as I told you, like 15 chickens, as I said. So
for livestock, what's your primary use there? Do you, or for the sheep, do you want to use them for meat, for wool, for both?
Yeah. So a couple things here. One, I was originally looking at the Katahdin sheep, and so people may, anyone who's kind of into this kind of thing may know of the Katahdin sheep. The Katahdin sheep, you do not have to shear. They're not a wool sheep; they're a hair sheep. So you don't have to go through and let me tell you, the chaos of shearing sheep for the first time. That was very fascinating and crazy. I still get like whiffs of lanolin. That's the chemical that is produced, that sheepy gamey smell.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy. Wrestling and wrangling sheep, but the Katahdin sheep.
Really quick, I saw a pretty impressive video of you lassoing a sheep, and that was my first exposure to your homestead, and I thought that was very impressive.
Not bad for a suburb boy.
No, I don't know how many takes you guys had to take to catch that on video, but if that was the first take, bravo, man, that was awesome.
Yeah, I think it was like the second take, but since then it's like 10 takes.
Yeah.
So yeah, the Katahdin sheep, it was what I was going for. They're a meat dairy kind of goat, but a sheep. But what's great about them is that you do not have to shear them, and they're hardy. They'll make it through a Pennsylvania winter, and I mean, they were bred up in Maine, so they can do it, but you don't have to go through the shearing process. Wool prices are like non-existent. Costs more to shear a sheep than to sell the wool, kind of thing. But we do have a bunch of wool that we're figuring out what we're going to do with it. But so what I'm going to do is I want to grow the flock a little bit. But essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to breed the sheep for the lamb. Back in college, I was a butcher. I did work on a farm, processing, ironically, sheep from start to finish. So I kind of know what I'm doing. I mean, there's things I'm going to have to learn, of course. It's been a while and all that. But the idea is, provide lamb for my family and, maybe some friends and family, sell them to offset pricing and things like that. And kind of do that. And then the goats, I didn't even want the goats. The farmer that was selling them he was kind of selling everyone as like a package. And he's like, the male and the females you have to keep separate until breeding time, which is going to be about end of October. And so if you have one male, like they're herd animals. So he's got this buddy who's a billy goat and like they're buds. I mean, it's hilarious. They're out there wrestling, hitting their horns and stuff. And then other times they're cuddling. It's like the cutest and weirdest thing at the same time. He's like, I can't give up my ram. Yeah, you have to take the billy goat. I'm like, I take the billy goat. I guess I might as well take the females, So very interesting. I'm gonna have to call him and figure it out. But he is saying that the goats, interesting enough, there's a good market for goats. Okay. Now my cousin-in-law, if there's such a phrase, married a guy from Australia. He's like this big, like, I can't wrap my mind around, like meat wholesaler or something like that. And we were talking like a pool party or something like years ago. And he's like, do you know what the number one protein source on planet Earth is? I'm like, beef. It's like, no, goat. So Middle East, Africa is all goats. So this farmer that I bought these from, he's like, I can sell adult goats to like ethnic markets. They have a really, really hard time like buying goat. Like you're not going to go to the grocery store and buy a half a pound of goat. It's not going to happen.
Right.
So there's a little micro market for that. But I don't think I could slaughter a goat that's been on the farm. They are like dogs. They're like pets.
Yeah, I've heard that.
Their demeanor. I mean, I don't know if I could do it. Yeah, I mean, I could do it if I needed to eat, right? But the kids, the baby goats, they're kind of like they're kind of trendy right now, right? In a weird way. But he's like, he would sell these baby goats, a month old, 2 months old for like $200. And so my thought process here is if I have the goats who are phenomenal at cleaning off the property and mowing my pastures, much better than the sheep are. Sell the kids off. We get 3, if they have twins, maybe 4 or 5, depending on how many of them have twins, which is supposedly common. And use that money to offset all the winter feed. And so that's a big thing with homesteading. Is look, if you live in a good climate, a decent climate like we do, yours is a little colder than mine. The summer is like, hey, free food. I got 7 acres of grass and nothing's been on it in a couple of years. Prior to that, it was a horse farm. There's a lot of clover. There's a lot of timothy. There's a lot of different types of grasses. So it's really great, which is another thing, right? Is getting a good pasture grass, good orchard grass that you want out there. But look, I'm already calling, hey, wholesalers, like, all right, I'm going to need like 50 bales, 60 bales. What are we talking price point wise? I mean, $5 a bale, easy with delivery. I mean, we're talking a decent amount of money. I mean, but if someone wants to do this, I have 2 other jobs, right? Which we've talked about on the podcast, but like, stream of income wise, I mean, these are things you have to take into consideration. But example, there's different ways to do it. Like I just finished up a little turkey pasture. We're going to get a couple turkeys, fatten them up for Thanksgiving. I have friends like, this would be such a cool experience. I want to learn how to do this stuff. I would love to come to your property. I would love to learn how to process an animal. So I'm like, hey man, all right, well, how about you buy your own turkey and then split some of the feed costs? Because to get a turkey ready for Thanksgiving, like you're not going to do that off of grass, acorns, and bugs. Like you're going to have to, feed them up, right? So there's a way. So I think like if you're doing this as a hobby or you're doing this as a profession or getting off the grid, you really have to you have to really look at it as like an economic ecosystem. I mean, it's of course it's an actual ecosystem. But you really need to look at an economic ecosystem, like what can pay for what, another example is we're looking to spruce up our barn. Through COVID and in the area, the homeschool community is burgeoning. And we had a great idea. We just opened up an LLC. Our farm is called Mountain Forge Farm. So my wife just opened up an LLC. So we could maybe do like some like on the farm educational programming. So you have a kid come, maybe like each kid gets their own chick, right? They monitor the chick, they feed the chick, they learn about farming, they learn about, responsibility. The parents can just kind of chill out, make a little money there. I mean, we're punching the numbers, what some other people do. And I'm telling you, in my area, there's a woman who works 2 days a week. Okay. Kids are there from, I think, 8 to 12. I think she clears about 30 grand a year.
Wow. Can't beat that return on investment.
I mean, look, hey, 30 grand is not the greatest income, but for 2 days a week,
yeah.
I mean, come on, right? So there's different things. Another thing for those that are listening, things that we found out. There are a lot. We haven't strike the gold yet, but there are a lot of grant money, or there is a lot of grant money for female agriculture. Okay. So those of you that are ladies, those of you that are married, have your wife open up an LLC. She can apply for grants that are specifically targeted to assist and promote agriculture amongst females. Am I just playing the system? Yeah, I'm playing the system, but who wouldn't do that in this thing? So, I purposely kept my name off of it. And so we're researching that. We have some friends that are helping us out with that. But it's a little, look, like I said, we just moved in mid-February. These are like little things that we're learning as we go. And so I'm sorry, I just talked for a long time. I don't even remember what the question was, but that's kind of what we got going on here. I'm also looking, once again, heritage breeds. 7 acres is not a lot. So I'm kind of processing what works, but I think I should be able to get a heifer and calf on my back 2-3 acres. I think it should work. I think what I've read was like a heifer or mom and a calf for like every acre and a half. Okay. I think that's what I read. So the Scottish Highland cow is where it's at, people. It's where it's at, especially if you're in colder climates. Scottish Highland is a more primitive heritage breed. Heritage breed is the way to go. Usually less physical ailments, less parasites, hardier. They have not been designed by man to have the greatest filet mignon, but they are the sturdiest of animals. So they're the cutest cows you could probably ever see. They're so cute, which may be difficult, right? But I think processing a cow, I don't have the equipment. It's just too heavy. I would have to send that out to get done. But they're like a long-haired cow. They're stockier, shorter legs. Their meat is more likened to bison. Less saturated fat, higher omega-3s, less cholesterol. I mean, it's still a protein source, a meat source, so it's still going to have that. I've never tasted it, but everything I'm reading, they're saying it's a better taste and a better health. The thing that sold me, and I think this is it. You know, like I said, I'm only been doing this for a couple months here, but efficiency, simplicity, less time. Okay, so Scottish Highland cow. Been reading all the forums, reading all the blogs. There are people out in Wisconsin, Minnesota, who are like, I built a pole barn for my Scottish Highland herd. They refuse to come indoors.
Wow.
Okay. So, yes, you want a windbreak. Yes, you want maybe a small run-in shed to get them out of the rain, get them out of the snow, whatever. But you don't need to house them, it seems, in these winter months in Minnesota. Now, Pennsylvania winter is not nearly as bad as a Minnesota winter, right? And what was I going to say about that?
That was their main use, the hardiness. What about dairy? Are they, good for dairy as well?
That's a good question. I have talked to people who are the children of dairy farmers, and they said never.
Okay.
They're like, don't do dairy. Okay, why? They're like, you are married to that function. Twice a day, every day. Christmas. I mean, obviously, I go out and feed the animals. I do all that stuff, but like, say goodbye to vacations. You know, say goodbye to long weekends. Like, you're not like you are married to this animal, right? So, you know, I'm just kind of staying away from dairy. Michelle, my wife, is going to experiment with goat milk.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah, smaller animal. You know, milking a cow and it, you know, versus a goat. I mean, come on. I mean, it's I'm assuming. Once again, I haven't done it, but I'm assuming it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, the other thing is, you know, if you get these dairy cows, you know, they're kind of been engineered to like be producing dairy all the time, and I don't even know what would happen if you stopped milking them. Like, if you're just like, I don't want to have a dairy cow anymore. Like, what would happen to them? Would they get sick? Would their udders get infected? You know, that's what I'm saying. A lot of these breeds, man, like they form follows function, as they say, right? And so my learning has been try to stick with more of your heritage kind of breeds who are more in tune to nature's rhythms, not man's dominance, right? You're gonna have a healthier animal. It's gonna be better for them. At least these are the types of things that I'm reading. Like I said, I'm really a newbie at it, you know, but I'm learning as we go. So we're gonna experiment with goat milk.
Yeah, these are good lessons. This idea of heritage breeds come up in a lot of the homesteading podcasts and YouTube channels I watch. So that's really good information. A lot of things I'm just jotting down here while you're talking, because
look, seriously, we have I'm talking about heritage breeds, right? But right now we've been struggling with one of the sheep. She's had a wound that doesn't want to heal. Wasn't our fault. We got her. When they were wrangling her up, she bucked into a dog kennel fence. Simple wound. Just didn't want to heal. We're doing the right thing. Animal lovers out there, you know, even though we have a homestead, we want to give our animals the best life possible before they serve us in giving us calories, right? And so, look, we had a vet come out. Vet came out. The primitive breeds have a tendency, or the heritage breeds have a tendency to be a little bit more skittish. Hard to get to her. He's like, I can see what's going on. It's like 40 feet away. He's like, you know, put a little of this ointment on, put a little bit of fly swap on it to keep the bugs off, and she's going to be okay.
Okay.
Didn't get better. We have one neighbor at the very end of our property. He's a physician's assistant. Thank God for this guy. Ironic as can be, he's a vegetarian. And he's like, look, if this animal was a human, we would have her in the hospital. He's like, we need to get her penicillin. We called the vet. The vet's like, oh, because of COVID, we don't have penicillin at our veterinary establishment. Go to Tractor Supply. I'm like, what? Tractor Supply has penicillin. You don't. Look, I'm a school teacher. I grew up in the burbs. Here I am administering injections to a sheep, giving her penicillin for 4 days, twice a day. Got better, calmed down, put her back out to the pastures. Waited a week, came back with vengeance. So we tried a stronger antibiotic. Same thing. Got better, baseline, seems good. Got bad again once she got off the penicillin. So we called a vet, a different vet. This vet came out, but look, she gave us a huge break, I believe, because she was friends with our neighbor. Still $160. $160 isn't going to break me. $160 is not going to break you. You're homesteading, and this is the harsh reality. You know, how much money do you invest in an animal before you say, look, it's sorry, you know, Mother Nature is taking control here. So she's out in the barn still. We've moved from injections to an actual IV injection. It's not like an IV that you see in a doctor's office, but now you inject the antibiotic into intravenous, right, into an actual vein. And so he has experience with this with humans. So the vegetarian physician's assistant is helping that, and they've bonded really sweetly. It's really kind of cool. But so what's the lesson to learn here? Know your community, draw on your community, draw on knowledge. We're not real rural, but we're rural enough that there's still a little bit of that, like, you need some help, I'm gonna come by and help you, you know. That's very powerful, very important. And you know, when someone helps you, there's the thought and the respect that you're going to help them, right? And you keep that kind of community going. I think we lose that in suburbia, and we definitely lose that in the city. It's this notion of, right, your community is what's going to allow all people to be successful and succeed. And you need help. You need help. Look, I don't have a big spread. Okay. Me being one man, it's not going to it doesn't happen. You know, my wife has to help, and she's not as interested in such things as I am. So it's really a labor of love for her. Look, I get up at 4:30 in the morning to go to work. I can't let the ducks out. I can't let the chickens out. I until the sun comes up, because that's really when the predators are going to kind of go away. Our livestock guardian dog it helps a lot, but he's still a puppy. He's still trying to figure things out. So she has to go out and let him out. So, you know, it's you learn very quickly that this whole Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone, you know, rugged individualism has its limit, where no, you need to be a part of a team.
Yeah, it's not all romance for sure.
Yeah, the whole family has to come together. You know, you have to, and that's awesome. You know, today my 6-year-old was shucking a stall for the first time. You know, how many adults have ever shucked a stall, let alone how many kids? She's out there shucking the stall. And she's like, Daddy, you know, Josie, which is the name that the neighbor gave the sheep, she really likes grass, you know, because she's in there, so she's eating like a sweet feed and some hay, and so she goes out there and she's pulling all the grass so that she has a little something greener to eat. And you know, it's when all things are working together with people, it's a beautiful
life.
It is, and I think just, you know, this is a little bit more the philosophical piece, you know, moving from the nuts and bolts, but.
Yeah, that kind of segues. Yeah, that segues us to the bigger picture, which I wanted to kind of get at and shift at. So up to this point, we've kind of been talking shop details, lay of the land, which is great. And a lot of people who are, you know, trying to figure out how to make this life a reality for them are probably thinking, where do I start? Because it can seem overwhelming. So hopefully your story and, you know, the life you've created over the last several months and are continuing to learn as you go and continue to build, hopefully that's inspiring to people and gives them some actionable steps, myself included. But in a bigger picture, kind of stepping out 30,000 foot view, what is it? What was it inside of you and your brain and your soul that caused a guy who spent most of his adult life in the suburbs to pack up his family and say, hey, we're going to do life differently and move out to this homestead?
Yeah, well, if I may, just because I feel like I'll be leaving a big piece of the puzzle out. My suggestion, just real quick, nuts and bolts. I would say changer things. I know it sounds silly, but maybe not. Is an ATV, a quad, game changer.
I bet. Yeah.
There's no question. You need one, right? Two, you got to think differently. My grass, even around my house, gets long. It's okay. That's the beauty of being on a farm, even if it's a 7-acre farm. You don't live in the suburbs. Your grass doesn't have to be 2.25 inches tall, right? So there's more, and this really has helped me, and it's getting into a little philosophy, is letting go of the perfection. Suburbs breeds perfectionism. Rural farm breeds necessity, efficiency, and being able to, what's the word, like improvise, okay? Figure things out. You can't just go to Lowe's or Home Depot and spend all this money to fix things. You can, but you got to use the scrap material. You got to find the old screw. You improvise. You make things work. It doesn't have to be flashy. My chicken coop doesn't have to be at a perfect right angle. It doesn't have to. It just doesn't. And it actually doesn't fit.
Yeah.
But in suburbia, when everyone's watching and all the eyes of the neighbors are upon you, it becomes something. I've always said it's the death of a man when he worries about fertilizing his lawn. I'm telling you, any men that are listening right now, if you're worried about the weeds in your property, it's time to get out.
Amen. Yeah.
Okay. It's a silly thing, but in suburbia, I'm telling you, people, I still have a foot in the door. I'm still kind of in the, our property is a little in the burbs. It's a weird niche, kind of weird property. It really is. But I'm telling you, this perfection, right? You gotta weed whack the curb. Why? Front yard is like an 80-year-old invention, right?
Yeah, it is.
Like it really is. Like, why do you have to do that? Why do you have to beat back nature so much that you need to dig up old dinosaur poo and purify it into petroleum to then put it inside of a lawnmower, which has been forged from the earth's minerals, right? And then burn fossil fuels so that you can control nature. So you say to that grass, how dare you? You are not allowed to be more than 3 inches tall. the amount of work, effort, philosophical, whatever that goes into to say, I will have dominion over my front yard so that everyone can see it is maddening, is sick. Okay.
Yeah, it's crazy when you put it. I mean, it's crazy anyway, but it's very crazy when you
put
it that way.
And then you're like, all right, so it's more than 3. All right, but I got some weeds in there. All right, I got some weeds. What are weeds? Weeds are just unwanted things, right? On a farm, weeds are wanted. I want weeds so that my animals can eat them and get more nourishment. I want the weed. The weed's not there. The goats are not happy. Like, I want the weeds, right?
Yeah.
So it's all this like symbiotic kind of thing. And so the other thing is, I know I was a little bit getting into the philosophy of things, but the other thing is, honestly, unbelievable dog is a Maremma, Maremma. For those of you that have kids or are interested in such things, a couple of movies to watch. One is the Biggest Small Farm, beautiful movie about a couple out in California that just go for it and they buy a farm. They're figuring everything out, this whole ecosystem kind of thing. I watched it for the first time, and I'm not a gooey guy. Okay, I do jujitsu, I run, I hike. At one point in this movie, when they were talking about the symbiotic relationship of the ecosystem of the farm, I actually teared up, and I was like, we got to move. But
Biggest
the other
Little
movie,
Farm? What's the title? Biggest Little Farm?
Biggest Little Farm. Yeah, it's really, really cool. Really cool. And the other movie, which is more like kind of comedy funny, is a movie called Oddball. And it's a true story about a Maremma livestock guarding dog that saved this like penguin population in Australia. So the Maremma, during COVID, I was been watching a YouTuber, a guy by the name of Gold. The YouTube channel is Gold Shaw Farm. Very entertaining, very well done. It's this guy from like New York, kind of like a banker kind of guy who moves up to Vermont with his wife, and he starts essentially a duck and goose farm. And he was actually 2 years ago, he was on the front page of the New York Times.
Wow.
Talking about how much money he makes being a YouTuber versus how much money he makes being a farmer. Like the guy kills it just from YouTube videos, right? Anyhow, this guy, he's got this livestock guardian dog called the Maremma sheepdog from Italy. So lo and behold, it's kind of like the perfect little homestead animal. Think of a Great Pyrenees, maybe 10 to 15% smaller, almost identical in look to a Great Pyrenees, almost. What do they do? What they do is, you probably hear him in the background sometimes. He barks, right? He barks at animals that may be trying to come in, or anyone's trying to come in, but they don't have a lot of aggression. So meaning like if a human came up, he's going to bark, let you know, but he's not going to snap at the human. Now, if a human goes in and is messing with the animals, maybe he would do something. He barks. If a fox came, he's going to bark, bark, bark. If the fox does not get the message, then he'll go after him. The other beautiful thing is that they have a low prey drive. So, I mean, like since a puppy, he's been walking around with chicken and ducks, never once tried to snap at him, never once tried to do anything. Okay. A lot of people like the Great Pyrenees, or they're more popular, or in some people that know about dogs. But the Great Pyrenees, they're more prone to wander. And they are almost have sometimes like a nervous barking. Like they just bark just to bark. Maremmas will only bark if there's a need to bark. Okay. And the other thing is they are not wanderers. So the idea is this: if you have a homestead, maybe 50 acres, maybe 20 acres or less, Maremma. If you have 50 acres or more, Great Pyrenees. Boom.
Okay, good to know. Now, did he learn the property lines relatively quickly, or does he wander into the neighbor's yard at all? I know you're a little bit suburban still.
So yeah, so there's one actual neighbor that like it's like our property's like a flag lot, so he's down at the bottom. And so yeah, he would go down there because he has dogs. But he hasn't gone anywhere else. And I decided, because what did Ben Franklin say? Like, hedges make good neighbors, kind of thing. So we got one of those because the property was already aligned apparently with one of those like wire fences. Yeah. Like those underground fences. So we got him one of those collars that, if he goes close to it, he gets zapped kind of thing, because we don't want him going down the driveway kind of thing into the main road. So he got zapped once or twice. He learned real quick. I thought I damaged the poor guy because like he was like really close to the house. He wouldn't leave. But after like a couple of weeks, he's like, all right, he got his big boy pants on, and now he's going out.
Does he sleep in the house at night, or does he sleep with the animals?
No, outside all the time.
Awesome.
Yeah. So they said the big thing is do not, when you bring him home, do not ever bring him inside of the house. Never. Right. So when he was a pup, we put him in a stall in the barn, put up a fence, like a chicken wire fence between he and the chicks and the ducklings. So he got used to the sights, got used to the smells, bonded with them. The ducks and the chickens moved outside. He moved outside with them. And yeah, he's out 24/7. Look, my mother-in-law is, I'm sure, really upset at me because she's like, oh, poor Bo, like what's happening to him. All the forums are like, you build this guy, people are frustrated. They build dog houses. Mm-hmm. They don't go in the dog houses. They want to be outside. Now, with that being said, we leave our barn open, so he can go in the barn.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, last week we got hit with the remnants of Ida. Okay.
Yeah,
I am not an animal abuse guy. I'm telling you, a foot of rain came. That dog was outside in that rain like a champ. Like nothing was bothering him. He was taking a bath and he was just eyes set on the animals.
Wow.
He's only 7 months old. Now look, he knows where the barn is. He comes into the barn with me. Okay. The barn doors are open. I'm trying to get him in, like, please, buddy, come in, please. I feel like, I'm going to be on some animal rights, violation list or something. I'm like, please come in. He's like, I'll come in when you're in there, but I want to be outside. Yeah. So I'll be very interested to see, in a bad snowstorm or whatever, what's going on, yeah. He's a peculiar dude. So, anyone who's starting it, I feel a lot more peace knowing he's out there. He roams around the perimeter. He marks, he barks, he sees what's going on. I haven't seen a squirrel on my property. When he was a puppy, like 12 weeks old, I would hear these fox cackle. Cackle down in the woods, like demonic cackling, right? Mm-hmm. Once he found his big boy bark, he's still got a little bit of that puppy high pitch to him. But I haven't heard of fox in months.
That's awesome, man. Wow.
Yeah. So highly recommend people doing some research. They're a tricky breed. They're not a pet. They're not going to, he actually sits for me, but he won't come. They're highly independent. They've been bred for over 2,000 years. There's paintings from Roman times of these dogs.
Wow. At
least 2,000 years of breeding of just, I have a job to do. I know what I need to do. Leave me alone. Don't give me any commands. I know what to do.
Yeah.
And that's that. It's really been bizarre.
Wow. I've never even heard of Maremma before us talking tonight. So it's on my list. I'm going to definitely do some research and maybe get one.
Fascinating breed, man, but not a pet.
Okay.
Not a pet. Yeah, you don't bring them in the house. They're lovable. They affection. He wants to be pet. He wants to hang out with us, maybe a little too much. I'm nervous. Maybe he bonded with us a little too much and more us than the animals. But everything I read was saying about 12, 18 months is really when their instincts kick in. I have a Bernese mountain dog and a lab. And my lab is a bird dog. And he got out and he started running after those chickens. And little 6-month-old Bozeman, who is probably at that point half the weight of the lab, went right over to that lab and was like, you ain't getting my chickens.
That's awesome.
So yeah, pretty remarkable breed. Really pretty cool for their function.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's zoom out a little bit. And
I'm sorry. Got me talking about the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, talking shop is great, especially for me since I'm, moving to a farm in a few months.
That's right.
Listeners know. Right. So I want to talk kind of big picture philosophical though for the second half here and really get into not so much the abstract ideas per se, but more the motivation and just the urgency of why now, this moment. It seems like there's this back to the roots type of movement. I don't know what you want to call it, but you and I were just talking a little bit before we started recording about how there seems to be we're in a moment in history where a lot of people are longing for this nostalgia of, kind of being old fashioned on purpose. And even if people are in the city, there's this rustic kitchen country look making a comeback, and this idea of knowing where your food comes from, or maybe even just having chickens or something simple in your backyard like I do now. What do you think is the movement? What's the mover or cause of that zeitgeist in the bigger idea? And then for you personally, what caused you to pack up and say, hey, it's time to make a move?
Yeah, no, I would say from the broad picture humanity, community, Americana thing where we see this kind of interesting back to land movement that has been going on for quite a few years now, is actually very reminiscent of something that happened in the early 70s. So early in the mid-70s in America, and for those of you listening, I'm an American history teacher primarily as a profession. In this post, really, to be honest, when it hit mainstream, it was a little bit post-counterculture, post-hippie movement. The hippie movement really climaxed 69 with Woodstock, kind of got its wind taken out of the sails with the death of Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin in about 71. And then, of course, Charlie Manson in 69, 70, and all that. But what happened was in the early 70s, mid 70s, there was this happened. Something very similar happened, maybe, less bells and whistles because there's no YouTube, right? And there's no Instagram, but there was a flux of young people that are moving out to rural America. It was like unheard of, right? People are like, what is happening? And essentially what happened was, these kids were brought up in the 1950s, 1960s suburbia, in your Levittown type of areas. And look, well, all due respect to those people living in suburbia, I lived in suburbia. I work in suburbia. The reality is this, it's fake, okay? It's fake. I mean, I can give you a book list of books that are articulating these problems way back since the 50s. They know it's fake. Back in the 50s, they knew it was fake. Everything is manicured. Everything is perfect or attempted to be perfect if you're upper middle class. It produces conformity. It produces these isolated bubbles. It produces the socioeconomic problems that we're discussing today. It's produced the educational issues and inequalities that exist today. I mean, I could talk ad nauseum about the expansion of suburbia and its production of the inner city ghetto. I mean, there's plenty of sociologists that are talking about it. Look, no shame on, let's be honest, no shame on the white people for the most part. But it produces them. Every action has a response. Okay. So anyhow, by the 70s, people are like, look, I don't want this. I want a visceral life. I want something real. I want something real. I want to feel, it's hard to feel inside of a climate controlled, air conditioned house that is wrapped in plastic, your vinyl siding. It's very hard to feel the world. So look, we were talking before we came on, I love poking fun at the, the hipsters kind of thing. But here's the thing, this whole kind of hipster movement that happened about 10 years ago. I think this is just the next projection of it, the next stage of it. Okay. So it's this notion like I want the boutique, right? I want the different. I want the real. I want the real coffee, the authentic jeans. I want the real deep smell of leather. I want the smell of pipe. I want the taste of whiskey. Why? Because my soul has been deadened and I need something to feel again. I really, really think, look, I got a couple years on you, but we pretty much have been brought up in the same generation, right? And look, everything is taken care of in some regards if you're middle class, upper middle class, right? There's worries, but the worries are usually, unless something drastic happens, and I understand that, most of the things that we worry about are pretty idiotic, ridiculous things that are causing us stress, right? But I believe mankind, some of us still hold on to it. I mean, look, it's like, it's Jack London Call the Wild. We're bucks sitting by the fire and we're hearing the wolves, howling. And we're like, there's got to be something more real. I want to experience life. And I think that is it. Okay. Suburbia has done me very well. It's given me a very good education. It's given me a very good job. But it left something out, and that is to really feel a visceral life. Okay. I'm telling you, it is bizarre as can be, man. There's a whole generation or two generations of people who don't know what it's like to sit in shorts and a t-shirt on a leather couch and stand up and your skin touches and gets suctioned to the leather from the sweat. Right? There are people who don't know what condensation is because their soda or beer is 40 degrees and outside in their house it's 85, right? You live in this climate controlled life, this sterile kind of environment, and I don't care who you are, that environment leaks into your thinking. It absolutely leaks into your thinking, right? Struggle, to know discomfort, to know uncomfortability. These are things which we could talk about, in a post-scarce economy that may happen one day. What will remain? If we live in a post-scarce society where all needs and all wants are taken care of, there's still a human inclination and a human desire that will not be met. And it is I think it might have been Oscar Wilde, I think, don't quote me on this, who said, too many men know the parts of things, right? But they don't know the whole of a thing, right? We're highly specialized, and we don't get the fulfillment of seeing a grandeur picture of like a whole project being completed, And these are our lives. You go in your car, you drive, you work on a small little part of a business deal, a small little part of a factory, a small little part of whatever. And you don't know the complete of a thing. And look, humanity, as evolved as we think we have been, or we have become, there are still those deep places of the primitive part of the brain, the amygdala, that is yearning to howl at the damn moon. And you can't howl at the damn moon when your blinds are shut in your air-conditioned house. It's not going to happen, right? And so I think it's a visceral, physical, in-touch life, right? Dude, I'm preparing for a philosophy class. I'm teaching in high school a book by the name of Ishmael by Daniel Quinn. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, man. I highly recommend it. Very, very interesting kind of take where there's a lot of things going on in the book, but one of the things is a remembrance, okay? I don't care how spiritual you are. I'm a pastor as well as a high school teacher. Look, the reality is, in some shape of the imagination, human beings are still a part, although more sophisticated, more spiritual. Yes, I know we have the breath of God inside of us and He formed us out of the mud. I understand. We're still a part of that animal kingdom.
Absolutely.
We're still a part. You're still a part, man. And God Himself knew that, right? Go and tend the garden, right? Go not just have dominion over, but tend to it. All right. If anyone ever wants to get wrecked, go on YouTube and type in RAM, RAM commercial, God made a farmer. You watch that, and if you don't want to go start a homestead, I don't know if you have a pulse.
Huh. Wow. That's well said.
Awesome commercial.
Yeah, I remember that. It was on during the Super Bowl, I think, a couple of years
exactly.
ago.
Yep.
Yeah, my stepdad, who is a farmer, I remember talking to him about that commercial when it came out. That's powerful. I mean, that's well said, man. There's a lot to unpack there. You remind me of, to paraphrase Thoreau, which is kind of becoming cliche, I think, but there's a line in Walden where he says, I went to the woods to live deliberately. To front only the essential facts of life so that when I came to die, I might not find that I never truly lived, or something to that effect. But this idea of living deliberately, it's so hard to do in a manicured, 9-to-5 cubicle type lifestyle. And most men, this quote, most men live quiet lives of quiet desperation. And the modern world has kind of put that on our shoulders because, like you said, we're part of the animal kingdom. We're part of nature, but we try to manicure not only the world around us, but our lives as well, to the point where we segregate ourselves from nature. And there's this disconnect. The cord is cut, so to speak. And we're basically just wandering in the sea aimlessly while the rest of nature is this thing to be tamed, but yet far off in the distance for the elect few, the farmers and the mountain men of America. Meanwhile, the other 95% of us live in the comforts of our air-conditioned homes, living a miserable life where our soul's dying piece by piece inside.
Yeah, well, look, I forget who said it. It might have been Clay Jenkinson, who is the originator of the podcast, The Jefferson Hour, which is a very fascinating, thought-provoking podcast, The Jefferson Hour. But, if you take a look at these great men, at least of the past, maybe now they hide in Silicon Valley, but the great men of the past, they make their money, they do their political thing, they arrive, and what do they all do? They're like, you know what? I want to have my gentleman's farm, right? Historically speaking, you know, it seems to be like once you've done what you're able to do, and even now, people do what they want to do. What do they want to do? They want to make a whole bunch of money to retire. To retire, or go down to Florida, go down to Boca and sit on the beach. Like, to be in tune with nature, right? It's like man's quest is this, right? And look, I'm not being arrogant, but look, I had access to great education, access to undergrad. I have 2 master's degrees. I have a good job, a well-paying job, and it's really kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When you have your safety met and you have your friendships met and you're moving into this place of more of a place of self-actualization, you realize that the whole quest is to get back to nature, to get back to the earth, to get back to the Adamah in the biblical Hebrew, like where we actually come from, right? And so, look, it's not everyone's thing. I understand it's not everyone's thing, but look, I'm 41 years old. Everything was going just the way you'd want it to go. I had a great education, graduate degrees, making good money as a school teacher, being a pastor, getting my spiritual quote unquote needs met, and feel like I'm partaking in the greater spiritual understanding of the community, which is all true. But everything was where it's at. A beautiful, wonderful wife, 3 beautiful, wonderful kids. I had the house, everything, right? And it was like all of my energies got me to this. But yet at this is not really what I'm yearning for. It's not really what I'm wanting, right? I know everyone wants different things, but I would suggest that yeoman farmer of Thomas Jefferson, of those people that are working the soil by day and reading Homer at night, is not a bad idea of a somewhat utopian society. Look, man, there's so much to say about all this stuff. I mean, to know what you do directly is going to impact your calorie intake, right? To know that what you're doing is adding to the ecosystem of planet Earth and adding to the value of Earth. And I honestly think, it doesn't have to be a homestead, but I believe fervently that happiness comes to a man and happiness comes to a woman when they actually can say that what I'm doing on a daily basis is adding value to humanity. And if you're like a data entry person, or you're working in a cubicle and you don't see the value. Look, I'm a teacher. I'm a high school teacher, right? As my main profession. Am I adding value to society? Yeah. But I don't see it. I mean, I see parts of it. I see shadows of it. A kid writes me an email years later, or this. I'm telling you, when you can say that pasture was barren, now it's producing. I'm able, look, the food that is on the table is something that I put my hand to, and I did.
Amen.
I think this is what this movement is about. An authentic life, to know that I did A and I added B and I produced C. It was me. I was able to, with the help of friends and the help of family, yes.
Yeah.
But I was able to leave my small mark. And look what I was able to do.
Yeah. And unless you're the CEO of a company or an entrepreneur, most of us, are kind of separated from point A to point C. We don't see what, happens in between. We don't see the end product. So kind of like you're saying, at least for me in the corporate world, this is a big part of that emptiness feeling, is you never see the fruits of your labor, at least not in its fullness. I mean, you're just a cog in a wheel, really. I mean, they call it the rat race for a reason, and we're all running toward this dead end destination. And there is sort of this call from nature and a response for many of us who are jumping off the train.
Yeah. And, you quoted Thoreau, and it's been a while since I read Walden. I used to read it once a year. But, the continuation of his quote, I want to paraphrase, right? He says, I went to the woods so that I could live deliberately, right? But then he says that I wanted to take life and force it, I believe he says, or drive it, maybe he says, into a corner. So at the end of my life, I would see that I truly had lived, right? But it's the driving into a corner. That's the piece. We can talk philosophically. We could say I went to the woods on a little camping trip, but this is the piece. How do you, or how does one drive life, as you define it, into a corner? Right? Like, I can see it. I can observe it. Drive it into a corner, right? And I think that's the piece. That's the piece here, right? This is the fine barrel whiskey. This is the raw denim jeans. This is now the Instagram people that are posting all this stuff about their homestead. It's the ability to drive life in a corner. This is my life. I, as a sovereign individual, am the one who is promoting, managing, suffering, dealing with, overcoming, God willing, this life. I that's it. That's the vein. That's the vein that people are looking for. I think that's the vein that's missing when people start to do addictions. And I know there's a horrible pandemic of opiates in rural America. I understand that. But I'm telling you right now, if you wake up in the morning and if you don't take care of your chickens and you're not going to eat, you're probably not going to be drawn to opiates.
Yeah, absolutely. Idle hands is the biggest draw to vice, man.
Yeah. So look, I mean, the Romans believed in this whole notion. The Greeks believed in this whole notion. Early America believed in this whole notion. But of course, Alexander Hamilton won. But it's this notion of being in touch with the land.
Yeah, the philosophical farmer.
Yeah, the Israelis have this very interesting concept, you know, the kibbutz of the Mushav. But there's this whole Jewish philosophical movement at the time of the birth of Israel. And those that are listening, I spent 3 years working on a master's degree in Israel. So I had an opportunity to really engage with some of the Israelis. And there was this whole movement where Jewish people in Europe that were moving to Israel at pre-Holocaust and even post-Holocaust had this. There was kind of like a subset. It wasn't the main thing, but it was like a subset culture that believed that the Jewish problem throughout the ages is that they were divorced from the land. Okay, right? For those of you who are not aware, you know, Jews in Europe for like 1,000 years, people were not allowed, in many places in Europe, were not allowed to own land. That's why they started to become bankers or lawyers or professors or merchants, right? The whole merchant of Venice. If you pluck me, do I not bleed? Right? Shylock is a merchant because by law, he's not allowed to be a farmer. He's not allowed to own Christian land. And the whole idea is the Jewish people, when living outside of the nation of Israel, were divorced from the land. And because of that, they were left empty. And there's a whole movement of coming back to the land of Israel, but being farmers. So now you have like these PhDs, these like doctorates in literature, these doctorates in philosophy, who forget about their doctorate and are like, I want to learn how to garden. Okay. Very powerful. I don't know who your listeners are at this point. I know you get into biblical stuff and spiritual stuff because I listen to your podcast. This is going to wreck any Christian that is listening, evangelical Christian that's listening to this. Biblically speaking, do you know what the first retribution for sin was?
No.
It's a Hebrew phrase. It's keret Israel or keret eretz. You are to be cut off from the land. Now listen to this. In the earliest biblical narratives, if you sin, what is the retribution? What is the punishment? You're cut off from the land. You need to literally leave the promised land. Okay?
Yeah, Genesis, Eden.
This is Adam and Eve. This is Cain, right? But it goes further on into the constitution of Israel when they leave Egypt, right? You break a law of Moses. Yes, some of them are death, some of this, that, but a lot of it was you are to be cut off from the land. Just think about that spiritually. The original retribution, punishment for sin in the biblical narrative is you're separated from the land. So what greater reconciliation is there? And we say, I'm going to willingly become alive to the land. I'm not going to be cut off. I'm going to become a part of it again. I'm going to become a part of the creation. I'm going to become a part of the ecosystem. And when you do that, you understand your part, right? This brings me back to this book, Ishmael, by Daniel Quinn. Fantastic book. You guys got to read it out there. Probably the greatest explanation I've ever heard. Now, look, I've listened to professors of theology try to explain why Abel's sacrifice was better than Cain's. Okay, probably the single greatest explanation of why Abel's sacrifice was valued more than Cain is found in this book. Okay, I'll leave that out there for those of you who may want to read the book. But it's this notion of coming back to the land, being a part of the systems, being a part of nature, being part of the cosmos, being, if you will, gods on the earth, right? If you want to take it from a Christian perspective, right? Heaven is the Lord's, but the earth he's given to man, right? If you want to take it from a Buddhist perspective, it's this whole notion of the cycle and the homeostasis of all of humanity and earth and the animals. It's this coming together of all things, right? But look, man, you're living in your little sublot with your asphalt, and you're freaking out that your grass is more than 3 inches, and you got to mow it so everyone can drive by. Isn't that a nice lawn? Look, man, this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. Get in touch with who we are. We came from the earth. We're going back to the earth. Dust to dust, Ecclesiastes, right? This is who we are, man. First commandment, be fruitful and multiply. Second commandment, go and subdue the whole earth. That's Genesis 1. Genesis 2 is go and steward the earth.
Yeah, that's the word actually that came to mind when we talked about doing an episode on this. So this idea of, getting back to the land, homestead farming, the idea of stewardship as a that word carries the notion of responsibility. It's not ours, but it's ours for a season. It's our responsibility to, like you said, kind of be gods on this earth, to kind of keep that cycle rolling the way it was designed to work.
Come on, man. I mean, if you adopt the Christian theology, God incarnate came to earth, right? And he was a carpenter, and he taught in parables of agriculture. It's like, I brought this up in a graduate class, and my professor was like, I actually felt, it was like one of the few times I've actually felt like, I knew the heck I was talking about. I said, take a look at the biblical narrative. I mean, there's something strange going on. Every time man screws up, God casts, the Judeo-Christian God casts man out further into the wilderness, right? It's like when they come together in cities, this is where sin is rampant. Every time, Adam and Eve, Cain, Abraham, Noah, then Abraham, sorry. It's this notion of you haven't gone out and subdued the earth. You need to go out. Lech lecha, he says to Abraham, go out into the land which I shall show you. There's a notion of nomadic principle, but settling, becoming civilized, or not just civilized, but becoming in the biblical literature, becoming a fertile crescent people, opposed to a desert wandering people, is a very, very fascinating theological contemplation. Okay, right? He calls forth people out of the desert, right, and brings people through a desert experience, right? James Michener, in his book The Source, has this unbelievable notion of why the Judeo-Christian God would call forth a desert people or versus a farming people. And this notion, man, when you're in the desert, when you're living out in nature, right? It's this notion of like your faith is always looking in the distance. It's always like, where am I going? How is God going to provide? But if you live in the Fertile Crescent, or if for the modern age, it's when you live in suburbia, it's like man has it all figured out. We have it all figured out. Man has become a god, right? But being out in nature, you immediately realize that you are not the god.
Yeah.
You're a part of the God's creation. And you just can't get that in suburbia. And I think there's very deep biblical pieces to this notion of being out in nature and being out on the edges of the frontier. And so, all that, why did I do what I did? I mean, I think in one way or shape or the other, I've said it through our conversation here. It's just this notion of wanting to feel, wanting to see, wanting to live a visceral life, for my kids to know where their food comes from, where life comes from. But I think the broad picture is really stepping out of the suburban experience so that you can experience.
Yeah.
So you really can experience life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What you're saying about, cities and kind of breeding vice and disease and avarice, Jefferson had strong opinions on that as well. And it's obvious, most plagues and diseases spread because of the close contact in cities and, lack of sanitary systems and whatnot. But also cities are, like you just kind of touched on, a monument to man's glory and not to God's glory. The tallest buildings in a city are testaments to the power of corporations, to the powers of individual men. And it's always kind of been that way, looking back at Babylon and even some of the ziggurats in South American cities and Teotihuacan and wherever
Right.
you go, these are all, some of these dedicated to the gods, but they're really, temples of what man can accomplish. The great kings, apart from being warlords, were great architects because they wanted to leave monuments for their legacies. Nature is the opposite of that, right? Nature is the great temple. And I think we as a people, me personally, spending the last several years in this environment and, living in or near cities and working in cities, it's very hard to be focused on the temple of God, so to speak, or the glory of God when you're surrounded by the glory and the temples of man 24/7 constantly.
100%.
And you see how it rusts and withers and decays over time. And you see how temporary and fickle it is, but yet we stay loyal to it because it's comfortable. It appeals to the basest, lowest common denominators within all of us. And it can satiate us for a time, but then it leaves us feeling hollow. Like you said, that feeling that you have to just get out. But many of us, and I think the majority of us, can spend our whole lives in, like we said earlier, quiet desperation, yearning to get off that hamster wheel, but it's a pipe dream. And it never happens for most of us because we can't break those golden handcuffs or step away from the comfort of man's kingdom, which is a hedonist temple. And, for those who are, not to sound too, I don't know, maybe Calvinistic here, but I feel like there's an elect, or there's a group of people right now who are hearing this clarion call to do something different. And these are the people that are being literally called out to come back to nature, come back to what we would call, God's glory, God's temple. And I think, that's not by coincidence. I mean, maybe it's a spirit of the age because we've gone so far off the rails in this one direction within industry and modernization. But also, I think there's a spiritual calling to get back to authenticity and to get back to what we were designed to do, which, as we said, stewardship over the land.
Yeah, man, 100%. Look, you and I are not going to build a skyscraper.
Yeah.
In fact, no single person will build a skyscraper.
Yeah.
It will take a team of people to build that. And there's no one person that can look at the skyscraper and say, that one stone I did. It's so much of the group think. But you and I can go out there and plant a row of corn, for lack of a better phrase, and say, I did it. I did that, right? And there's something very powerful with that. And the other thing is too, like, look, yes, there are people that go on vacation and they're like, hey, I want to go to New York City on vacation. You're right. There are people that do that, and sometimes we do that. By and large, where do people go on vacation? Oh, I want to go to the beach. I want to go to the woods. I want to go for a drive somewhere. I want to step out of the hustle and bustle. Well, why is it that in your vacation, this is where you want to go?
Yeah.
What's pulling you there? Right? It's because somewhere deep inside, that's where you're supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you're supposed to be. And I think this is what's going on. And I think the other thing too is, I think one of the biggest, if not the biggest plague of modern man, at least in the West, is living a life of comfort. Comfort and pursuing comfort. You pursue comfort, you're going to be overweight. If you're going to pursue comfort, your soul is going to be overweight, right? Your soul is going to be lethargic. Your soul is going to be damaged. We're not built to settle in comfort. We're built to push the line, right? And look, man, I'm waking up early to take care of the animals, coming home from work, and I got to do X, Y, and Z. Or my kids, you come home from school, you got to go check for the eggs. Creating a life where it's not all about comfort, but it's about service. It's about doing something for another life. Produces a mentality, a psychology, a spirituality that will be a human with more hubris, And then look, man, we haven't even talked about the political implications of this. And civic responsibility and democracy. Look, and I'm trying to get I always like this phrase that you use in your podcast, and you usually do it like every podcast or every other. I'm not sure if you know this, but you say like woo woo woo.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I love it. I love it though, because I think it's like, I don't know, onomatopoeia. I don't know, but like it conveys what we're talking about. Like, I don't want to get too woo woo here, right? But the reality is, at the birth of the American Revolution, 96% of Americans, I believe, are farmers.
Yeah.
Okay. I do believe the systems that are in place, whether you want to say governmental, I don't know if I want to say governmental, but spiritual, whatever. The reality is this: you cannot tame a population. You cannot tame a population that is self-reliant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
You can't. That is the beauty of the early days of America. That's what Thomas Jefferson understood. That's what he knew. That's what George Washington, even though he became this Federalist, he knew when he's done being president, I'm going back to my farm. When you're somewhat self-reliant, fully self-reliant, look, you don't need a government that is keeping you from cradle to grave, right? And I think, honestly, I think there are massive, I don't even want to say political, because I think that's too loaded of a term. I think there are powerful sociological implications to a people that need to go to the grocery store and get their chicken wrapped in plastic. There's a detachment to life. There's a detachment of value. There's attachment of hard work, of what it takes. We take things for granted 100%, but there's also a piece that someone else is going to take care of it.
Yeah.
And I believe it promotes a level, and I think I'm telling you, like, I'm a public school teacher, high school. All of this stuff produces a mentality of not gaining what used to be such an American virtue, right? Individual responsibility. I'm responsible for my actions. I'm responsible for my life. And look, I know it sounds so silly, but I think if we really unpacked it, you have generations of people that go to the grocery store and buy their frozen chicken nuggets.
Yeah.
that is not producing a clientele, a citizenry, a generation of people who are individually responsible. And if you are individually responsible, what are you going to be individually responsible about? You're going to be individually responsible about getting some Scott's lawn care and putting it on your freaking front yard so that it looks green.
Yeah.
Kudos to you.
Yeah. The weekend warrior landscape.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That's it's powerful imagery, man. I wonder, this just came to mind, but like recently there's been this phenomenon of billionaires launching themselves into space and wanting to colonize the stars. And I wonder if this is like the ultimate culmination of man's running from his birthright or running from his destiny. Like there's got to be a metaphor or a parable in there somewhere that we're using our best and brightest, our most valuable resources, not to nurture the land or put people on 40 acres and a mule and get back to the land, but we're trying to get off this planet, literally trying to colonize space. And that's where we're putting our best mental efforts right now. It's like man will do anything before he accepts his calling, is what it seems like.
Look, before we got on here, I was telling you about a book that I'm reading right now, right? Wendell Berry, The Unsettling of America, right? And literally last night, I'm reading through this, and I'm like a third of the way through it, but he's getting into this place where essentially what we're promoting on planet Earth, and he starts talking about agriculture and big agribusiness and all this stuff, is we are so mindful of the future. So we're promoting like people that are always concerned about the future, right? Like we got to change climate change for the future. We got to change this for the future. Like I always thinking the future. Like we're going to leave this planet because we need to colonize the stars, or rather the planets, right? In the future. And we're so future focused. When you're in a homestead, the future is there. Yeah. But the reality is you need to be present in the moment, because the future will not occur if your animals are not getting fed.
That's right.
So I think that's a piece of this, man. We're so future oriented that we're forgetting about the present.
Yeah, I think sorry to cut you off. I think
no, that's fine.
Wendell Berry actually had a quote. This is a paraphrase too, but I remember reading in something he wrote a couple of years ago. He said the existential crisis is basically a modern phenomenon, because the farmer or the agrarian man didn't have the luxury of sitting around and philosophizing about his place in the world. He knew what his place in the world was because he lived it every single day, not, whether he wanted to or not. Like he picked up the plow and went to work, and he, didn't have the luxury to have an existential dilemma like we do in the modern sense.
Yeah, no, it's perplexing. And I think, I think this is the important thing. Like, I mean, I'm not advocating to become Amish. Right. It's easier to go black and white. It's much more difficult to see the grays, right? And the off whites. And I think this is the beautiful thing. Technology is designed to make our lives more productive, but not to replace our lives. And that's actually a paraphrase of Wendell Berry. It's like technology was meant to accentuate our abilities, not to replace our abilities.
Yeah.
Right. And so we can have that. Like you can have a homestead with solar panels and it's going to kick ass. Mm-hmm. It's going to be awesome. Right. You can take care of your animals with modern vaccinations. That's going to be amazing. You can produce, you can be better. I'm not saying let's go back to the 18th century. Right. But man's quest for the future, we forget about the values and the beauty and the things of the 18th century that is speaking to us. Like, don't forget it. Like, don't forget our values. Mm-hmm. And this is it, man. Like, we're always thinking about the next. We're always thinking about the better. But better is actually very kind of actually abstract. It's like, is it better?
Yeah.
What is progress, right? So, look, with our technology now, you can have the best of both worlds. You could be a homesteader and work 6 hours on your laptop, mm-hmm. and spend the other 6 hours, or to be realistic, or 12, or maybe 10, taking care of your homestead. Mm-hmm. You can do it. Runs us into the whole thing that I love is, media ecology and technology and man's use of it. But yeah.
Well, so speaking of technology, I mean, could you imagine? And Clay Jenkinson, I think you brought up the Thomas Jefferson. I think he's mentioned this before, but can you imagine what a Madison or a Jefferson would do with a iPhone at their fingertips today? Like, they would think that was some sort of witchcraft. I mean, the tools and the knowledge right at your fingertips. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And if you had said that to anybody 100 years ago who was, a lover of learning, they would be blown away that we have these things at our fingertips. But yet the vast majority, the masses, are huddled over these phones, just consuming empty calories day in and day out, because the entertainment feature has just consumed us in every way, or the social media feature. It's sad, to be honest with you. I mean, we're all victim to this in one sense or another, but I also do spend a lot of time learning things. Like, I watch countless hours or listen to countless hours of podcasts or YouTube videos, learning new skills, learning what I want to do, goal setting, like things that I would have had to literally spend, hours exploiting resources to find these people in before technology to learn these skills. It's all right there at our fingertips now, and most of us never take advantage of it. It's just mind blowing. And somebody would kill to be in our position at almost any point in history to have these resources at their hands, and yet we squander them. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, what did Jefferson do with YouTube? Would he be watching, cats playing the piano or whatnot? But yeah, we are in the most fascinating point in human history, and what is really perplexing is that man is taking this stuff and using it for the cure boredom, and their insatiable appetite to be entertained. And it's destructive. And look, if anyone's on the fence, you being on a homestead, you're not gonna have the time to be doing that.
Yeah, I was going to say, it goes full circle, right? Because again, luxury of freedom. I think it's escapism, right? People want to escape from their boring, desperate lives sometimes. Not to sound too harsh, but I've been there. I'm there a lot of times. That's why, and you yourself as well, probably. That's why we're choosing a different path. But a lot of people just want an escape from their otherwise miserable existence.
Yeah, and look, and to be fair, some people would be like, well, you buy a little farm, you do a little homestead, you go off the grid, you're escaping too. You're correct. I am escaping. But the difference here is other people are escaping from something with no goal in sight.
Exactly.
I'm escaping, or people like us, we're escaping to something. And I think that's a huge difference, like escaping from something without any goal in sight, or rather the goal is just to be entertainment to cure the pain, or to escape to something that says, I actually want to experience the pain. I want to experience the pain of waking up early, seeing the sun come up with a cup of coffee, and having to go out and make sure that my herd is okay.
Yeah.
Right. And being a part of life. That's a big difference. It's a huge difference, and it's perplexing, man, because what we could do with what we have, like you were saying, man, I mean, fine, call me what you want to call me, call me a Jeffersonian, but can you imagine right now if the people that are unemployed in our inner cities or in our rural areas had the opportunity, for lack of a better phrase, I mean, obviously there's other platforms that we can figure out, but if they had the opportunity, like they did 200 years ago, to go west, get 40 acres, get 100 acres, and try to hash it out of the wilderness.
Yeah.
I mean, you just think. I mean, think about the status of like our inner cities. What if they were pushed out? For lack of a better phrase, right? And they're working the land, and they have acreage that is theirs, and they're learning and they're building and they're part of communities, and they're I mean, it's idyllic. I understand, but it's idyllic, maybe in a Marx sense, but maybe not. But there's something about it, man. I mean, I would love for there to be like some kind of like, you know, if we can come up with like a several $1 trillion infrastructure plan.
Yeah.
How about a several trillion plan to like relocate people into territoried areas in America, which there still are, where people are gonna work, and they're gonna produce, and they're gonna learn, and they're gonna be able to wake up in the morning and be like, man, I freaking did this.
Yeah.
you know
And not for nothing, these skills, many of these seemingly lost skills, have a place in the modern world for the sake of, for lack of a better phrase, when shit hits the fan. Like, I'd be kind of remiss if I didn't talk about this at least briefly. But
Sure,
on a
sure.
podcast like Eschaton, the idea of survivalism, which is also kind of popular in the current zeitgeist, I think there's this general feeling of, things are kind of rushing toward a cliff in one way or another. And you see people starting these communities, or these militias, or bomb shelters are being put up. A lot of that, I think, is tapping into the same vein, just in different manifestations. And that is, this isn't natural. This isn't going to end well. In a world built on underground fiber cables, can't last forever. But we're running headlong into this modern world, really just figuring out as we go, not realizing or taking a moment to appreciate that we're 30 years removed from the Cold War, and that even now we're only a couple of nuclear explosions away from being back in the Stone Ages. What's going to happen if that happens? If a New York or a Beijing or an LA is gone tomorrow, and we have to live in the dark like the Amish, like you mentioned earlier, and figure out how to make our own way in the world, even if it's just for a short time, for a few months. A lot of us out there, I don't think, would even know where to begin. So these are just good life skills for that reason, as a safety measure against the house of cards that we've all really built in our modern societies. Our cities are so vulnerable, our suburbs, our infrastructure, like you were just talking about, our transit systems, it's all so vulnerable, built on a castle of sand, basically, that could be washed away in any moment at our own hands, or, through nature, whatever. But at some point, I think we all kind of have this feeling that something is going to shake this up, whether it be permanently or temporarily. We're going to be shaken up, and are we prepared for it? And most of the people out there, just living a normal, modern, advanced country life, I'm not too confident that we would be able to handle ourselves in that situation. And that's honestly a big part of the call for me to get back to the land, to get back to a simpler, more natural and pure way of living. Is it's the way that we've lived through all of history, and at some point in the future, it will be the way we have to live again. This can't go on ad infinitum. The way it's going now, we'll just run out of resources.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of a lot of stuff in what you just said, man. I mean, I always had this joke, like, do you think the Amish like woke up, in the end of September of 2008 and even knew that there was a stock market crash? It's like,
right.
I always joke, like, the one day we're all going to wake up and be like, dang, the Amish had it right, and I think there's a huge piece to that, of the self-reliance, but not even the self-reliance. I think that's kind of been misinterpreted. It might not even be possible to be completely self-reliant, but more localized, autonomous communities where you can exchange goods and services to create a better value for you and your family, right? Like that's kind of what we're talking about. And not to get too deep into the weeds, but a thing that I've been wrestling with is, we'll say that the future is quote unquote good, and there isn't a zombie apocalypse. There isn't a bomb that goes off, right? And this I think actually scares me more than the nuke. And it's this: what if mankind can actually achieve what we seem to be trying to achieve since the agrarian revolution? And that is a post-scarcity society. So what happens if, this is a fun kind of mental, philosophical play or conundrum, right? What if every social justice issue that could ever be devised was completed and solved? you name it. Racial inequality, socioeconomic inequality, sex trafficking, any environmental, any, like, you name it. Whatever the social justice thing is, you name it. Actually, I think I thought about this because you had a guy on. You had a man on, and I forget his name, and I apologize, several months ago, who was actually talking about this. And it stirred me, man. I forget the name of the podcast. But he's like, what happens if we do achieve all that? Now, what? And this is like what kind of like disturbs me. Even take the social justice stuff out. Like, what if all of our economic stuff, like everything is taken care of? The robots are doing everything. No one needs to want. There's no need. It's all taken care of. Like, the reality is, I actually don't think we're that far off from that.
Yeah.
When that happens, now what? What do we do? Who are we? Why are we? And I think these are the existential things where it's like, there's a piece of humanity that is still in us, that even if all of our needs and even if all of our wants are 100% taken care of, everyone on planet Earth, we'll just pretend that happens. There's still going to be a piece of us that is yearning. And what is it going to be yearning for? I think it's going to be yearning, because we see it already, yearning for a real, visceral life.
Yeah.
Feeling the blisters on your hands, wake up in the morning knowing that you have to put your hands to the plow. Something that you have to do. And that scares me, because there's people already that don't really have to do. And I think it has deep spiritual and psychological trauma that it produces. Yeah. And that's what actually scares me most, actually, I think, is, when we reach that stage, there's a piece of us that needs more.
Yeah.
And I think homesteading helps brings it.
Yeah. And if we achieve that world of abundance where every need is met, every desire satiated, man still is, our nature doesn't change, right? So man is still going to be tormented with himself, maybe even more so, because there's no struggle, like you kind of just touched on. I think man needs struggle. Man was designed for struggle. And if there is no struggle, we've talked about this in the past with martial arts, your journey with jiu-jitsu, we've talked about it with physical fitness. Man needs struggle. Men in particular, mankind, yes, but I'm talking about men in general. And if they don't have it, they'll find it. War, they'll find it in some sort of self-imposed difficulty. And if we don't have that, if every need is met, then that existential crisis that we were talking about earlier will just be magnified, because we have idle hands. We have that natural impulse within us, that trigger warning that this isn't right. Things are out of calibration. And that's why I'm so, I guess, on the opposite side of an optimist, thinking that things are going to end badly, because as we get more abundance, as we get more and more comfort, I feel like men will ensure that we do self-destruct. We'll actually tip the domino ourselves, because we'll be so miserable in our comfort, if that makes sense.
I think the proverbial reality is that man will willingly push the domino over, because if he does not push the domino over, he has nothing to put his hands to.
Exactly.
I mean, when you were speaking, man, I was like brought back to Albert Camus, the myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if you've ever engaged that, but for your listeners, Sisyphus is destined in Greek mythology to push a boulder up a hill, right, by the gods. I forget, it's been a while, but he's destined. That's his punishment for going up against the gods. I forget what the cause was. Maybe it was like stealing knowledge or something from the gods, right? So he pushes the boulder up, and once he gets up to the top of the boulder, I think it's Zeus, pushes the boulder back down to the bottom of the mountain. Sisyphus now the next day has to push the boulder up, and this goes on for eternity, right? So Albert Camus, the great French existentialist, has this brilliant phrase, and he says, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. That's like his famous phrase from the myth of Sisyphus. And what is this? All of us, you're a human being, you're Sisyphus. You are on a journey of pushing a boulder up a mountain. It could be the career path. It could be the rat race. It could be the homestead. It could be the family. It could be the education. Whatever it is, there's some kind of proverbial boulder that you push up to the top. And the reality here is I've been there. You get to the top, you have arrived, right? And then some force pushes that boulder back down, and there's a new thing. There's a new thing that you need to now push up, right? College education, now it's the career. The career, now it's the better career. It's the family, it's the kids, the second kid, it's the third kid, it's the house, it's the next house, it's the retirement. We're always pushing this boulder, which is the symbol of like your life quest, up the dang mountain. When you get up the mountain, Zeus, life circumstance pushes it back down. You got to start all over again. That's life. You start all over again, right? But Camus has this like this interesting take, and it's, you know, what's his other famous phrase? Like, either, you know, in existential crisis, either you'll contemplate suicide or have a cup of coffee, right? It's like, what are you going to do, right? But this is the thing. All of us are pushing a boulder up a mountain. It's called life. Your goal, your achievements, right? You have to stop. And if you're going to do that for the rest of your life, even if you're retired, you're going to be doing it. This is the plague of man, right? From the gods, or just being a human, right? You're pushing a boulder up a freaking mountain, right? It's what you do in life. Are you happy? Well, I'll be happy once I achieve. No. You're not going to achieve. You're going to get to the top of the mountain. You're going to be awesome in your career, and then it's going to be pushed back down, and you need to make more money. You're going to have a better career. You're going to have a second house, a third house. You have to put your kids through Ivy Leagues. There's always going to be something. So then, therefore, you have to imagine Sisyphus happy. So you tell me, in your career pursuit, you're pushing this freaking boulder up, and you do everything that you are supposed to do. Will you be happy? Most people say, of course I will be. The reality is you won't be, because mankind is not built that way.
No.
You're going to push it up there. You're like, I got another mountain, another boulder rather, to push up a different mountain. So it's a life quest. So then the reality then becomes, right? What will you do that if you're doing it every day for the rest of your life, that you can say, I am actually happy? And I think, as Jocko Willink may have put it, you push the boulder up the mountain. And what if you say to Zeus, hold on a second, I'm going to willingly push the boulder back down myself. You don't have to. I want to push the boulder back down, because I'm the one that has the ownership of my destiny. I'm going to push the boulder back up. It's my own doing, my own want, right? Because I want to see the journey. I want to see the productivity of my own effort. And I find joy in that own productivity, not at the end, right? It's very Buddhist, yes, but it's also Greek mythology. It's very Stoic, actually, in its philosophy. It's like, whatever you do, you're happy in it. And you know what? I want to push the boulder back down, because I'm going to find the joy in building it up, right? So the question here is, where can you be in your existential philosophical space where you can say, I'm actually happy? Yeah. And if I have achieved, what the freak? I'm going to push it back down. I want to start all over again. Yeah. Hey, if you get that in the cubicle job, hey, man, power to you. But I'm telling you right now, man, that this is kind of off the gridish, homesteadish, visceral life. There is an immense amount of joy raising an animal up and seeing it produce and starting over again and doing this. There's you don't have to imagine. You don't have to imagine Sisyphus happy. You have to imagine it. It's reality. I think this is what the Jeffersons knew. This is what Washington knew. This is what Teddy Roosevelt in a different way knew. I think this is what Jesus knew. This is what Buddha knew. This is what Aristotle knew. This is what all these great minds, they knew this. We're too busy pushing the boulder up to get to the top. We don't even have the mental awareness to realize that it's just going to get rolled back down. We don't know that. You know, yeah. That's where I'm at with it.
Yeah. Wow.
I don't know if that makes sense, or I just went off on a
Absolutely. No,
tangent.
no, absolutely makes sense. Yeah. I read the Myth of Sisyphus a couple of years ago, and it's a pretty heavy reading, like even at a college level,
Oh,
that's some
heck yeah.
dense
Heck yeah.
stuff. Yeah. I remember reading and rereading chapters in that book, but it can leave you disheartened. And I think my first instinct, working in an office cubicle job at the time, especially, it left me anxious for a change. And hearing you kind of interpret it, and now through the lens of where you are in life, and the path I'm on as well, it's encouraging, because there is a way to truly find happiness in the effort, in the exertion. It's just, are we pushing the right boulder?
Yeah, that's a good word.
Yeah. Well, we're 2 hours deep already.
Oh,
but
man, wow.
This has been a great conversation, man. I could go for another 2 hours easily with you here, but in an effort to keep this somewhat digestible, I'll refrain. But is there anything else you wanted to touch on that we didn't cover? Do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, I would say anyone that's serious about this, there are great resources. I think the penultimate resource is a guy by the name of Joel Salatin from Polyface Farms down in Virginia. He is kind of like the guru of all this stuff. Another guy, I don't necessarily like his YouTube channels too much, but I have a lot of friends that do. His name's, I believe it's Joshua Rhodes.
Justin Rhodes.
Justin Rhodes. Thank you.
Yeah.
There you go. Those are great places. I have found like meat and potatoes, Joel Salatin's books. You Can Farm, Folks, This Ain't Normal. A one that I got to get back into. I read about 3/4 in it. 3/4 of it's phenomenal. There you go. You got it. Yep.
I'm actually reading it right now.
If you're a little bit into the woo-woo spiritual side of things, which I am, and Josh is as well, The Pigginess of the Pig. Weird title, maybe you probably should change it for marketing, but if you're coming from a little bit of a spiritual background, just restoring the sanctity of life in farming. Brilliant book. But those are the places I would start. And I think the other thing is, Joel Salatin's, comes right out of the gates with, he's like, start small. You don't need 20 acres. If you want to do this, not like me, like I kind of feel like I'm kind of a phony, because, I got this like a homesteady thing on the side, but I'm also working a job, which is fine. But, if you want to like really, really like do the homestead thing, he's like, look, off an acre of land, if you're doing this right, you can make some decent money. And the big thing, which is always so hard in the American Western kind of concept, and that is, don't go into debt. Don't borrow money to get the $20,000 tractor. Don't. You're just gonna eat any kind of profit that you have. I'm selling my first dozen eggs tomorrow, so I mean, I'm not making any profit yet, but don't take on the debt. That is like big. Make sure your spouse and your family are on board with it. That is clutch. Start small, see what works for you, see what variety of birds, animals, sheep, goats work for you, what you like, what you don't like, even the tasting of the meat itself. Rely upon your localized community, get people to help you, get friends. You'll see people will be like all impassioned that you're doing something like this, right? You're passionate about people. It's going to awaken things in other people. They're going to come. They're going to help. They're going to be, oh my gosh, you're getting a farm. Let me help you put up fencing. Let me help you do this kind of stuff. Do all that kind of stuff. And don't, you can. It's pop. You can have the best of both worlds. You don't have to like move to Missouri, which is apparently the state which is most apropos for homesteaders, the best laws for homesteading, supposedly. You don't have to do that. Dude, you don't have to do that. You can work your 9 to 5 and hustle on the side and teach your children and your loved ones what it means to do this. You can do that. You absolutely can do that if you don't binge watch Netflix.
Yeah. Amen to that.
Right. So yeah, that's my, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome advice, man. And one other thing that I just wanted to plug in about, since you're on the Salatin topic, I remember, my ultimate goal is to get off the rat race hamster wheel and do this thing full time, as a lifestyle. And I think Salatin says save 2 years of expenses before you quit your day job. So whatever your hustle is, and that can be a lot less than you think. It doesn't have to be $100,000 a year and 200 grand before you quit your job. I mean, like Dave said, if you're out of debt and you cut your expenses, you're not paying for every streaming service under the sun. I mean, that might be $30,000 a year. And if you save 50, 60 grand, you can dive in and, take a chance, do this thing full time. And you know what? If you fail at it, at least you tried. And two, you can always find another crappy cubicle job. So, I mean, you can always go back to that. And hopefully none of us and nobody listening to this, has to do that if this is the journey you're on. But I hope you're inspired by Dave's journey. I know we spent the first hour kind of really getting thick into the weeds, and I hope that's useful. I know it was for me personally, but I'm sure it was for many others as well. But if you have any questions about specific livestock or farm questions, and you just want to talk shop, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll put Dave's info in the info box as well, so you guys can contact him. But if you have any questions, or if you really just want some knowledge or direction, or it feels overwhelming, you want to know where to start, feel free to reach out to either of us, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation from there. But this has been great, man. I appreciate you coming back on. People always ask when I'm going to have you on again, so thanks for taking the time. I know you're a busy man, Renaissance man, so to speak. A lot of irons in the fire. So
thanks, man.
We'll have to do this again down the road when you're a sage-like seasoned farmer in 6 to 8 months, and see what lessons you have to share with everybody then.
We'll see. Thanks so much for having me on, man. It's always awesome. Always fun.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been too long. We'll talk again soon, buddy. Thanks a lot.
All right, man.